If you're here with us for the first time, my name is Brad, and I'm one of the pastors here. And I don't know if you know this, but today is the last week in our 9-week series in the book of Ecclesiastes. Yeah, I hear mixed reviews. Yeah, that's expected. That's to be expected. Well, for the past 8 weeks, if you've been here, you know that we've been studying a very unusual book in the Old Testament called Ecclesiastes. And we've said from the very beginning of this series that Ecclesiastes offers a very unique, very distinct kind of wisdom. And I think one of the really powerful things is that the wisdom that Ecclesiastes offers to a group of people like us is particularly relevant. Because in our culture today, we struggle to find meaning, and we really struggle to find genuine joy. We struggle to understand purpose. These are things that we wrestle with in our culture. And simultaneously, there's probably never been a culture with more options or opportunities presented to it than the culture we live in today. And so for Ecclesiastes to enter into our lives, into our experience, and then be able to divide and show us and clarify where we actually find meaning and hope, I think is an incredibly powerful thing. And so it's been a great series as we've moved through it, walked through it. And here in the last week, I want to talk about a couple of things that I think are really beautiful about how the writer or the teacher of Ecclesiastes actually comes to a conclusion, which, by the way, you might have noticed I just distinguished between the writer and the teacher. The author and the teacher are two very different people. And so when you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, there are some verses at the end of the book today that we're not going to get into because they're not actually the writings of the teacher. We're looking at the teacher of Ecclesiastes. In the last little bit, you get a sense that somebody else has curated much of this teaching. But as he comes to a conclusion, as this teacher begins to draw things to a close, he does something really fascinating, something that I find really interesting, and it's this. After all that he's said and all that he's done, he ends his teaching with a poem. You say, well, why is that really interesting? Well, I think it's interesting because poems, or a poetic nature of something, tends to be a greater or deeper reflection of the soul than other forms of writing. When we get into poetry, when we start writing things poetically, we typically begin to speak with the language of the soul. And for most of us today, we go, okay, well, I understand that, but most of us aren't sitting around and we're not reading poetry to each other. We don't sit around like, hey, let's do a poetry reading. I know some of you might, and like you drink coffee and wear berets, that sort of thing. But most of us, we're not like writing and reading poetry. But let me ask you this question, ask this question of you. How many of you listen to songs? Raise your hand if you listen to songs. Driving your car with the radio on, right? You listen to music, right? So basically a song is a poem set to music, right? Which explains why some music seems to be speaking to or coming out of a place of the soul. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed that you listen to some songs and for whatever reason we get to poetry and song and we have this ability or this willingness to bare our souls? We have this willingness to say, well, this is how I'm really feeling. We might sing some things in a song that we would never say to another person. And so because of that, as you listen to songs, you hear people processing their pain. You hear people dealing with the complications in life. You hear people coming to realizations. You get an idea of how people think and how they live through the songs that they sing. Which also is why, for us, there are songs we listen to, and when we hear them, there's something that resonates inside of our soul. There's something that connects, because they're speaking about something that's deeper than just what's on the surface of our lives. Now, why is this an important thing for us to consider? I think it's important because of this. When we look at Ecclesiastes, there's a lot that this teacher has taught us over the past 9 weeks that can be a little bit disorienting, right? I mean, you dive into a book where somebody is constantly kind of returning to this melancholy state, or you keep opening this book where there's this occasional hint of hopelessness that seems to be sprinkled throughout it. When you read something where there's this open frustration about unexplained circumstances that take place in good people's lives, when you hear that stuff, it can be disorienting. The experience of people at their worst. The teacher has said, I've seen people in all their evil, and I've experienced that evil myself personally. I've seen all the things they do under the sun. The feeling that he keeps giving us over and over again, that time is slipping away. All of these things, they're kind of off-putting, right? Do they make anyone uncomfortable like they do me? Anyone uncomfortable with those things a little bit? Yeah. Just me. Thank you. Yes, that's good to know. Once again, I'm the weird one. I'm not surprised by that. But so all of this is a little off-putting unless, let me ask you this question. What if it was John Mayer saying all these things? Now, this is a game changer, okay? I'm just going to open your eyes to this. This is a game changer. What if John Mayer, and I say this because everything I just described, a little bit of melancholy, some twinge of hopelessness, frustration over life circumstances, experience of people at their worst, time slipping through your hands. These are most of the lyrics of John Mayer's songs right here, right? And so it kind of changes when you start to hear. In fact, let me give you an example. This week I thought of this one, Stop This Train by John Mayer. It basically is Ecclesiastes. Listen to this. No, I'm not colorblind. I know the world is black and white. I try to keep an open mind, but I can't just sleep on this tonight. What's he talking about? Same thing the writer of Ecclesiastes has been talking about, right? Like, I know the world's supposed to work this way, but it doesn't seem to be working this way. And so then he starts his existential rant. Stop this train. I want to get off and go home again. I can't take the speed it's moving in. I know I can't, but honestly, won't someone stop this train? Life is just going on and on and on. Then he moves on and he says, don't know how else to say it. I don't want to see my parents go. One generation's length away from fighting life out on my own. Stop this train. Vapor, right? It's fleeting. I want to get off. I want to go home. Then he goes on. He says, so scared of getting older. I'm only good at being young. So I play the numbers game to find a way to say that life has just begun. Had a talk with my old man, said, help me understand. He said, turn 68, you'll renegotiate. Don't stop this train. Don't for a minute change the place you're in. And don't think I couldn't ever understand. I tried my hand. John, honestly, will never stop this train. And then remember how the writer of Ecclesiastes would occasionally let us up for air and say something like, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. John Mayer does the same thing. He says this. Listen, once in a while, when it's good, it'll feel like it should. When you're all still around and you're still safe and sound, and you don't miss a thing until you cry when you're driving away in the dark. He puts us back in Ecclesiastes, right? So stop this train. Now, I thought about this song this week because I actually was listening to an Apple, iTunes playlist that had another John Mayer song on it. And so I was listening to that one, and that's when I started to notice there's this theme in John Mayer's music. And so, guess what? I'm going to share another one with you. There's this other song called I Guess I Just Feel Like. And this is basically how John Mayer just happened to feel, I think, at the moment. He says, I guess I just feel like, and in case you didn't know, this is how he feels like. He says it twice. Then he says, nobody's honest, nobody's true, everyone's lying to make it on through. I guess I just feel like I'm the same way too. By the way, this feels very Dr. Seuss-ish as we get going. I'm warning you. I guess I just feel like good things are gone and the weight of my worries is too much to take on. I think I remember the dream that I had that love's going to save us from a world that's gone mad. I guess I just feel like, what happened to that? I guess I just feel like the joke's getting old, the future is fading, and the past is on hold. But I know that I'm open, and I know that I'm free, and I'll always let hope in wherever I'll be. And if I go blind, I'll still find my way. I guess I just felt like giving up today. So I'm listening to this song, and I just hear the angst, right? I hear the feeling. And here's what's amazing. 2 songs later, and I know you're going to think that I was listening like the world's most depressing playlist. It wasn't. It was just like a regular playlist. All of a sudden, I start hearing the lyrics of these songs. And so 2 songs later, not a John Mayer song, I'll let you up for air, but this other song by these guys called Brothers Osborne is called While You Still Can. And I listened 2 songs later. It says, make amends with that old friend you swore you'd never talk to again because you miss him. Call up your mom on the telephone. Tell a whole lot of nothing till the cows come home. And listen. Cross every T. Down rose the odds. I don't even know what that means, but the next line's important. Because years grow wings and fly on by, and time slips through your fingers just like sand. And then here's the chorus. He says, because everything you thought would last forever never lasts forever like you planned. Don't let your night become another, so take life by the hands while you still can. The brilliance of the writer of Ecclesiastes is found in the fact that he isn't creating some new understanding that is a universal human experience. It's that he's tapping into the very same thing that the poets and songwriters of our day and age are tapping into. Song after song, as you listen to the songs of our culture, song after song, poet after poem seems to express this same theme of slight melancholy, of a twinge of hopelessness, of frustration about circumstances that happen, bad things that happen to good people, experiencing people at their worst, time slipping away. This is a universal experience of our culture, of being human. This is what it means. This is why when someone sings those songs, there's something inside of us that goes, yeah, how do we stop the train? There is something inside of us that goes, yeah, I should make that phone call. I should make the most of these moments. There's something that happens, and the realization comes to us that the writer of Ecclesiastes, he is in this same vein, except he's doing something that nobody else does. He's giving us resolution to this. I kind of wish at this point that we would have taken the first 11 chapters of Ecclesiastes and just sung it all to like an acoustic guitar tune with a good-looking dude on stage, because maybe we would have heard it differently. But I want us to hear this differently. I want us to hear how he closes. He closes with a poem. He closes with metaphors that speak to something about our soul. And I just want to read it for you. And then we'll unpack it. We'll talk about what these verses mean. But he says this, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1. He says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain. When the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop. When the grinders cease because they're few and those looking through the windows grow dim. When the doors to the street are closed and the sound of the grinding fades. When people rise up at the sound of birds but all their songs grow faint. When people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets. When the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire no longer is stirred. Then people go to their eternal home and the mourners go about the streets. Remember him. Before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vapor, vapor, says the teacher. Everything is vapor. So let's talk about this. You know how you hear a song sometimes and you go, I'm not sure what that song's really about, right? Like Hotel California. Does anybody really even know? Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin. Do we really even know? I know what some of you are thinking, but we don't know what they were thinking, right? And you read this and you go, I'm not really sure what he means by this. So let's unpack it. What's he actually talking about? In the first verse, you kind of get the beginning. He sets things up and he says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come. And this is setting the tone for everything that follows. He says, I want you to remember something. Remembering something. This is really critical. But I want you to remember at a specific moment in time. And when is that moment in time? Remember it in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come. Now, this is a really interesting Hebrew phrase, and this is where the metaphors start to begin to unpack and fly and start to make sense of what he's talking about. When he talks about the days of trouble, the actual Hebrew translation of that phrase into English would be better translated the evil days. In this case, the translators did a really good job, because when we hear evil, we immediately think morally bad, right? We think immoral days. So there would be days when things would be immoral. But it's actually, this phrase evil days is a Hebrew euphemism. It's just a phrase that was used in common language with common people to describe aging. The days of trouble, your evil days, is simply a way to describe the aging process. Like when you start to encounter those evil days, and by the way, any of us who have aged at all know what the author is talking about, right? There's a certain evil associated with aging that is unlike any other evil. There's a certain kind of trouble, right? There's like the evil that happens when you wake up after doing something and you feel pain in places you didn't know your body could feel pain, right? That's a special category of brokenness and evil in the world, right? Called aging. There's the things you used to be able to do in just a moment's notice, and now you're struggling to do them. That is a certain kind of trouble. And he's talking about those kinds of days. Those days when you discover new aches and pains. That is the kind of trouble. And he says, remember before those days come. Remember before then. I want you to remember. And then he continues on. Remember, verse 2, he says, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark and the clouds return after the rain. This is a really interesting metaphor. And for those of you that are curious, this isn't some sort of weird end times philosophy, right? Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark. What he's using is just a description to say when a season comes to an end. And specifically a season of life. Before this season of life comes to an end. That's what he's talking about. Before the clouds return after the rain. Again, this is another interesting Hebrew phrase. You know how when it storms and there's a rain cloud that comes and it drops its rain and then it clears out and there's sunshine that follows. You kind of enjoy the sunshine, right? And there's this gap, and then there's another rain cloud that comes. This Hebrew phrase is describing this experience where it seems like there's less and less time between the storms the older you get. Like the older you get, the more you just seem to be living with the cloud of the storm. So this might be another fun way for us to understand this. I don't play much pickup basketball anymore. Because when I do, I hurt for like 2 weeks, right? Because the cloud comes in after the rain. Like there's this thing that happens that you do something, and in your older age, the older you get, the more you ache. And that's sort of the description that's being given here. So you just, before those days come, before then, remember, before. Verse 3, when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the windows grow dim. Before this happens, remember, when the keepers of the house tremble. Do you know what the keepers of the house are? Your hands. Before your hands start to tremble, before the strong men stoop. I grew up with a grandfather who was like one of the most manly of manly men. My grandfather, in fact, I have pictures of him in my office when he was in the South Pacific during World War II. I have pictures of him by his lineman truck when he worked as a lineman in the deserts of Arizona. And I remember as a kid, I'd walk up and I'd ask my grandpa to pick me up, and he would let me hold on to one arm, and he would do curls with me as a kid. And so my grandpa, forever in my mind, had these massive biceps until the day that my wife met him. And suddenly I saw my grandfather through my wife's eyes, and not knowing his history, and what she saw was a strong man who had stooped in his old age. Eventually, the strongest of men bend with age. So the hands tremble, and your back begins to bend, and the strength is gone. He says, before the grinders cease because they are few. Any guess what the grinders are? Your teeth, right? Really obvious. And why are they few? Because they're falling out. That's literally what he's describing. When the grinders is a very poetic, beautiful way of saying before your teeth fall out and you can't chew your food. And then he says, and those looking through the windows grow dim. We have this saying in our culture. We say that there's like a window to your soul. And what is it? Your eyes are a window to your soul. That is an ongoing illustration for all cultures, that our eyes are a window to our soul. When he talks about the eyes growing dim, what he's talking about is when your eyesight fades, when you need bifocals or trifocals or quadfocals, if they make those. I'm probably going to need them, right? That's what he's describing. There's this aging that's taking place. And then verse 4, he says, remember before the doors to the streets are closed, and the sound of the grinding fades. When people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. Again, he continues with this. The doors of the streets, he's referring to the ears. This is a Hebrew illustration of our ears. The ears are the doorway. And he talks about those doors being closed. When you begin to lose your hearing, there's a certain amount of isolation that you experience. Over the past few years, my wife has been trying to convince me that I'm losing my hearing, and I just keep saying, what? And seriously. And I've been denying it for a really long time. And then like this year, I'm starting to embrace this reality that, I don't know, maybe I am losing some of my hearing. And I notice it when I'm in like crowds, like restaurants where there's lots of noise. I notice like people are talking and all I see is mouth moving because everything is one sound coming at me. And I've been fighting this. I've been leaning in. I've been like, no, I can hear. I'm not what she says I am. And recently I was in a restaurant with some people and I was fighting to straining to listen. And at some point I just was like, I'm out. And I just like sat back and I just started pretending. And it was like the doors just closed. And let me just tell you this, I probably shouldn't say this. It was kind of nice. Like if I had hearing aids, they'd be like, just turn the thing down right here. Just like, I just kind of sat there, took everything in. It was like I had my own little party going on for a little bit. Just like, all right, this is kind of fun, you know? So that's what is being described here, is that the hearing is gone. So before you lose your hearing, when people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint, you know what he's talking about? You know how the older you get, you just can't seem to help but wake up at 4:30? That's what he's describing, right? You're going to wake up with the birds, but he's saying it's not because you heard them singing. It's just because you're old, right? I had to use the bathroom 4 times, and finally after the 4th time, we're just staying up. That's basically what he's saying, right? So before this moment, before this, verse 5, he says, before people are afraid of heights and dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms, before the almond tree blossoms, before the grasshopper drags itself along and desire is no longer stirred, before this. Now, this almond tree blossoming, before the almond tree blossoms, let me show you a picture of an almond tree blossoming. What color are the blossoms of the almond tree? What do you think the author is referring to with this metaphor? The hair. Some of you are pointing to your own heads, and I'm sorry for this, but yes. Some of you should be grateful you still have hair, right? We should all be thankful for that. But he's talking about before your hair grays. Eventually, all of our hair turns white. Before this. Before the grasshopper drags itself along and desire is no longer stirred. All day I've struggled to tastefully present what he's describing here. Don't know that I'm going to do any better here, but let's just say that the grasshopper doesn't drag itself along as much if it has a little blue pill. Because some of you are explaining to the people next to you that in the Hebrew language, this grasshopper reference is referencing, you guys get it, right? Don't need to go any further, right? And desire is no longer stirred. You kind of move along. No, I'm just going to keep going. So, then we come to verse 6. Just moving on, all along. Just moving on to verse 6. All of this is building, right? All of it's building. There's this aging thing. Eventually, the teeth fall out and the hearing goes and the eyes can't see. And you're not as nimble. You're not as youthful. You're not as young. All of it's building. It's building. It's building. It's building. And then you come to verse 6. And what is he reminding us of? And in verse 6, he says, remember him. Remember him. Before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. All of those final illustrations and metaphors are metaphors of death. And he says, remember him. And you go, remember who? Remember what? If you go back to verse 1, remember he said at the very beginning, remember your Creator. Remember your Creator. And all of this is building. Remember your Creator before you get to this point. Remember your Creator before the dust returns to dust and the Spirit returns to the God who gave it. Return to your Creator, because in that moment, in your age and at your death, things will be painstakingly clear about what is important. This is why certain people among us possess a certain wisdom that the rest of us do not, because they can see things from their vantage point. The writer of Ecclesiastes is saying, now, in this moment, you have the opportunity to see things differently. Remember your Creator. And then he closes this poem the same way he begins the book. He says, vapor, vapor, havel, havel, everything is vapor. The time is short. And life is confusing. So remember your Creator now. And here's the beauty of what he's doing. The poems of our culture, the music of our culture, it never resolves the angst. All it ever does is stir it up inside of us. I mean, there's a part of you that you hear some of the songs, you hear the lyrics, you listen to them, and you have this message of like, yeah, you're right, time is short, and I do need to make the most of my days, and I know that it's fleeting, I know that I need to focus on what's important. You hear this, but all it's doing is identifying the problem, the symptoms. There's this thing that's going on, but it doesn't ever help us. Like John Mayer never actually says, this is how you stop the train. He just makes you realize it's running out of control. And then we're all left to sort of panic in that, right? We sort of sit here and all of us make plans. I mean, most of us during this series, we're like, I got my bucket list out, right? I got people bucket lists. I got things bucket lists, because you realize it. So all we do up to this point is stir up the reality that this angst exists. But the brilliant teacher of Ecclesiastes, he says there's more. And by the way, if you conclude that the purpose of this book is just simply for you to say, I'm going to be more present or I'm going to be more in the moment, then you've missed the end purpose of the teacher, because he closes with this statement. And he shows us how you do it. Not just, I'm aware and want to be more of it. He actually says, this is how you become that kind of person. And it's incredibly simple. Remember your Creator now. Remember your Creator now. And the emphasis is on the now. Remember your Creator now. That's the whole point of all of this aging stuff that he's talking about. He's saying you have the opportunity to possess this knowledge that will transform your reality in the present. Remember your Creator now. And in the middle of this, he's addressing this mythology that you and I move through our lives, that certain things can just be dealt with or thought about in the future. Well, these are my earning years, or these are my working years, these are my educating years, these are the house accumulation years, this is the stuff selling years. Like we categorize all of this. He's saying, no, you can't put this, like if you put this off, eventually you'll get to this point and you'll look back and say, I missed all of it. So remember your Creator now. Because all the way through this book, from the very beginning, what has he been doing? The writer of Ecclesiastes has been showing us how you and I to attempt to make substance. We try to make meaning out of vapor. And he says the only way you're going to find meaning in this vapor is if you remember now. Remember your Creator now. And so this mad scramble that we experience, this feeling of, you're right, time does fly. It is resolved in this. We can do something about it. And the writer of Ecclesiastes says, you can solve this. So I'll just give you an example, and I probably have overused this example a time or two. But it's such a good example, I think it captures fully what he's talking about. When you are hiking in the woods, when you're driving your car out in the wilderness, when you are out and about, riding a bike, doing whatever, and you come to a cliff, a view, a peak, when you break out of the trees, when you round that corner, and all of a sudden there's an expanse in front of you that is just gorgeous, and it's beautiful, and it's breathtaking. There is something that happens in those moments. There's something that happens when unexpectedly you stumble onto this view. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but in those kinds of moments, there's this ability for you to, in that moment, forget about the past. Like somehow the past, in that moment, you're so overwhelmed with what's in front of you that the past no longer matters. And you also don't worry much about the future. You just simply are. You are in the moment. And when we encounter that, when we have those experiences and we're taking those things in, there's a couple of words that we use to describe that encounter. We use the words awe, or we use the word wonder. Those are really interesting words, right? We use those, and what we're describing is a feeling. What we're describing is an experience. It's actually a very difficult thing to give words to. Somebody tell me what awe feels like. I don't know. It's just this weird thing where it's like nothing else really matters but this moment. And what we're truly encountering in moments of awe and moments of wonder are moments in which we stumble into remembering our Creator. When we take in that view, when we see this, and there's that overwhelming sense, like there's something that right-sizes God in our view in that moment, where suddenly you go, oh my goodness, God is way larger and way more powerful and way more involved than I ever imagined. And at the same time, it right-sizes us, right? Suddenly I see myself with a greater sense of clarity. We are remembering our Creator. Those moments of awe and wonder are moments in which we are experiencing and remembering now, in this moment. So the writer of Ecclesiastes, what he's telling us is this. He's saying, remember now. Quit fumbling through life and stumbling onto these moments where you go, man, for just this brief second, I saw everything clear. He's saying by using the word remember, he's saying you have it within your capacity. You have it within your control. You have it within your ability. You have it within your resources to remember now. To remember your Creator in this moment. And so the invitation that he's offering us is to bring this into every single day, which, by the way, is the exact same invitation that Jesus offers us. Jesus' offer is exactly the same. In fact, I think oftentimes we miss what Jesus is saying and teaching and really what Jesus is trying to get us to experience and encounter. Because most of the time, because of the cultural framework that we live in, we hear Jesus and we see Jesus through that cultural lens that we live in. And so whatever Jesus says or does, we sort of drag him out of his context and we yank him into our own. And then we say, well, Jesus, I think you're trying to make sense of this. And we try to have him fill in the blanks that we have. Or we try to have him answer the questions that we're asking. Or we try to have him see things the way that we see them. When the reality is that Jesus is oftentimes doing the opposite of this. Instead of us just using Google Translate on Jesus and making him fit our culture, what Jesus is doing is reversing this, and he's saying, no, I want you to see things completely differently. We tend to have this very linear view. We tend to have this very specific way of looking at things. And so when we look at Jesus, oftentimes we think of Jesus in really two terms. We think of Jesus as helping us get over our past and secure our future. And I'm not downplaying or minimizing the importance of either of those two things, but we are missing something significant in what Jesus is actually offering us. Jesus frequently is giving us a brand new way to view the world, to see the circumstances around us. There are things that just don't make sense in our culture because of our worldview, because of our cultural framework. We struggle with this one. When Jesus says that the kingdom of God is at hand, that God's kingdom is around us, that God's kingdom can be grasped and taken hold of. In our linear cultural framework, that is nearly impossible for us to conceive of. You notice that? Like we go, no, I know he says that. No, but what he's saying is there is a reality amidst this reality that is different. You can actually have an encounter with God in a meaningful way that is in the middle of this thing, or you can completely miss it. I mean, when Jesus says it to a group of people, he says it to people who didn't see it. And so there's this framework he's trying to get us to understand. He's opening our eyes and saying, no, there is a kingdom way of living. There's an eternal kind of life that can be entered into now. And what Jesus is inviting us into, what he wants us to experience, yes, he cares about our past. Yes, he secures our future. But in all of that, he is inviting us into a lifetime of wonder and awe, which is exactly in line with the teacher of Ecclesiastes. Remember your Creator. Have that moment of wonder and awe now. That's the teacher's final invitation. So he basically says this to us. Tomorrow morning the sun's going to rise and the sun's going to set. And the rivers are going to flow. And the mountains are going to stand, and they're all going to be there just like they were the day before. And you're going to get up, and you're going to make a little money, and you're going to spend a little money, and you're going to eat a little food, and you're going to drink a little wine, and you're going to do all of these different things. And in all of it, he says this: if you want to make any meaning out of it, if you want to bring any purpose to it, if you want to have any joy, if you want to have any life, remember, in your eating and drinking, and in the sun rising and setting, and in the working and the spending, in all of those things, would you remember your Creator? Jesus said it this way. He said, follow me through your days. Follow me. That's the invitation. And whatever it is, or wherever it is, or whenever it is, suddenly it comes to life when we see the God who created us in its midst. Amen? Amen. Would you guys stand with me? You did it. You guys did it. We've got some certificates for those of you who are here every week through the series. A blue ribbon, a red ribbon for those of you that watched online. That was painful, but we're here and it's good. But as you go this week, this summer is an amazing time and place for us to live this and experience this. And so may you remember your Creator now. May you remember Him, and may you live a life that reflects the peace and the joy and the meaning that comes when you know your Creator and you've seen Him and you've had wonder and awe as a part of your life. Amen. If you want to pray with somebody, there's folks down front. You can pray with them, and we'll see you guys later. See you next Sunday.